what is the future of NATO-Turkey relations? And actually, all morning until now, we've had a closed expert meeting discussing the issue. A very, very, very interesting debate where, one judges who usually would want how many notes one takes, and I took quite a few pages of notes, and I know many of my colleagues are on the table on this particular issue. But we also thought that we should also do this to have a public debate, an open debate. So some of the issues can also be discussed in public, and also to hear your views and ask questions to the speakers. And again, when we have a very interesting panel, highly competent panel, as you can the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy of the NATO-Turkey Treaty Organization, Ambassador Ünal, Çevikoz, who is the President of the Ankara Istanbul Center, Bruno Lété, who is a Senior Fellow for Security and Defense Issues at the German Marshall Fund in the United States in Brussels. Of course, my colleague, Professor Serhat, Guvenc, who is the Professor of International Relations and the Chair of the Department of International Relations here at Kadir University. And it's going to be chaired, of course, by Professor Mustafa, Aydın, another colleague from the IR department, and happens to be also the rector of this university. I should also express my gratitude to NATO, is co-sponsoring this event and our discussions. NATO, especially its public division diplomacy, has always been very, very helpful in anything we've liked, especially the CIS and as the International Relations Council. Any activities related to NATO and discussions about NATO in Turkey, and I hope this will continue because we consider it to be a priority. So, without any further ado, Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dimitri. Let me welcome you all, also Tacan University, for this timely event when CS, the National Relations Council, started talking about organizing this event. We didn't expect that it to become so timely, but it has become. Fortunately or unfortunately, depends on where you are looking from. I'm not going to be part of the panel in a sense that I'm not going to voice my opinions on the topic, but I'll just restrain myself to moderate the panel and the questions from the audience. We will follow the announced program, and we will have first maybe 5 to 7 minutes of opening remarks from the panel. Then we'll open for debate, and we can also react to them, obviously. We can get questions. Let me start with Ambassador Tacan, Assistant Secretary General of NATO, responsible for public policy.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman. It is such a pleasure for me to be in Istanbul at Kadir University to speak before an audience who has interest in security issues in general, and I fully agree with you that this meeting coincides with a time which is quite a heated debate about relations between Turkey and NATO. First of all, when we talk about relations between Turkey and NATO, it gives us the impression as if NATO is an alien entity to Turkey, which is not the case. Turkey is a very important ally of NATO, taking part in all the decisions that NATO makes, because the rule is consensus. So without the active involvement, participation of Turkey in the decision making, it cannot be possible to have any decision adopted at NATO. The latest being the NATO summit meeting of 2016 in Warsaw. It was attended by President Erdogan, and all the decisions were taken with the participation and contributions of Turkey as a strong, staunch ally of the organization. Now, what has happened to trigger last week's debate, and I find the sentiments, emotions that was caused by very unfortunate and unacceptable incident. And being a Turkish national, I fully subscribe with these emotions, because what we have encountered in this unfortunate incident is the involvement of the founder of the Turkish Republic, Kemal Atatürk, and also President of Turkey. So it is something nobody can accept, and it was the rightful way on the part of the Turkish public, together with the government, to react to such an incident. But as a NATO official, I can also tell that these sentiments are well recognized and understood by NATO officials. That's why when Secretary General Stoltenberg was in Canada attending Halifax International Security Forum, when we informed him about this incident, he immediately acted, although with time difference. He issued a written statement highlighting the unacceptability of this incident, and he apologized for any insult caused out of this incident. Later on, we also tried to understand, and he immediately called President Erdogan and expressed personally this apology, and assuring him that proper investigation would be done, and whatever necessary would be put in place for such events not to repeat themselves in the future. This matter is taken very seriously, and we should not see it as something directed only to Turkey as such, but it's also something against NATO, because one fundamental thing that makes NATO strong is unity, cohesion, and solidarity among allies. Therefore, if there is such a disagreement or rift between NATO as an alliance and one of its members, it is not something that NATO would gain. We should put the question, who would benefit out of the consequences of such an incident. Therefore, we need to put things in good perspective. And as I said earlier, the emotional, sentimental reaction and debate is quite understandable in the initial phase when such a crisis erupts. But I'm sure that we all will have a cool-headed, logical and pragmatic discussion with all facts in place. I will once again repeat that NATO authorities and Secretary General at the helm of the organization is taking this matter very seriously, knowing that it shouldn't have happened to any of the allies, but at the same time, Turkey is a very important ally, while NATO as a whole is confronting itself with a number of challenges. NATO is in a continuous adaptation process. In 2014, with the illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation and the aggressive actions in eastern Ukraine, a number of decisions were made to have readiness action plan, and in Warsaw Summit meeting, it evolved to strengthening of deterrence and defense with a meaningful dialogue with the Russian Federation, but also projecting stability beyond NATO's borders. On 25th of May this year, the heads of state and government of NATO allies met in Brussels, and they also focused on two important areas. One, how to increase defense spending, and there is a pledge from 2014 to meet 2% GDP for defense spending, and 20% of the defense spending to be allocated to new equipment, so that we have proper capabilities to deter and, if necessary, to defend, because Article 5 of the Washington Treaty is about collective defense. Any attack against one ally is considered to be an attack against all. Also on 25th of May, the leaders had a chance to discuss and decide on a number of measures to enhance the role of NATO in fight against terrorism. And this is something that Turkey has been pushing hard within the alliance, and the action plan has been adopted at that meeting, and we now look forward to the summit meeting to take place in July of next year. We just had the defense ministers meeting, and we are going to have, beginning of December, the meeting of the foreign ministers. In February, again, defense ministers meeting. April, foreign ministers, and June, once again, defense ministers meeting to lay the ground for the decisions to be taken at the level of heads of state and government at the summit meeting. There are discussions going on regarding NATO's, Turkey's place in NATO. Well, Turkey joined NATO in 1952, and since then NATO has been an important point of reference in our collective security and defense. One has to see how NATO has been contributing to our security and defense, while recognizing the important contributions that Turkey has been making to the joint efforts and endeavors of NATO as a whole. Therefore, I can only wish in my introductory remarks to see a good debate in Turkey. We have to admit that security issues are not that often debated in its full perspective. It is usually focusing on the actual threats or challenges emanating from the geographic proximity to Turkey, and it's quite understandable. But if meetings like this one could generate a good debate regarding the value added of certain security arrangements that Turkey has with its membership to NATO, I think we would have a more informed discussion rather than going with our emotions, which was, as I said, quite understandable when the crisis erupted. But I think now is the time to work together with our allies to face the challenges in a more capable and equipped manner. To conclude my introductory remarks, once again I would like to re-emphasize that this incident and the reaction of the Secretary General should not be seen as if to cover up what has happened. On the contrary, the Secretary General himself is personally committed to look into what has happened and see the reasons properly and make sure that we have additional safeguard measures and mechanisms for this not to repeat itself in the future. And this is in fact what in his personal telephonic engagement with President Erdogan pledged to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, Serhat Guvenc from Kadir University.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and my President. It's an honor and privilege to sit on the same panel with such distinguished speakers. I will always cherish the opportunity, and I'll say a few words about the state of Turkey-NATO relations. Maybe we should start with defining NATO as an alliance in transformation, in constant transformation. As Assistant Secretary General already put it, trying to adapt, to the new challenges and risks, new security risks emerging. And this is understandable. We are talking about an institution that was established and matured during the Cold War, trying to adapt itself to the rapidly unfolding global security risks. And the basic idea is NATO is juggling to remain relevant as an institution. And it started out as an institution of collective defense, but in the first decade after the end of the Cold War, it was the only instrument available for collective security. So that was the niche NATO filled for some time. But the first decade of the new millennium was a time of soul searching for NATO. And here I will bring in my personal experience with my visits to NATO headquarters. My first visit was back in 2004. And back then, NATO would assume the Afghanistan mission, assume a role in Afghanistan, and there was a great enthusiasm in the headquarters for the upcoming mission. And they were ambitious and, again, enthusiastic. And some people even went so far as to label that mission as a make-or-break mission for NATO. NATO had to succeed in Afghanistan, otherwise it would have been doomed. That was the prediction at the time. My second visit was in 2009, after 5 years. Well, there was this disappointment, fatigue with the Afghan mission, and realization that NATO was not cut out for state building or nation building. 2 years later, the atmosphere was marked by enthusiasm again, because NATO just came out of the Libya mission, the Operation Unified Protector with flying colors, and they regained their self-confidence, and the presentations, the common theme in the presentations we were given in the headquarters was that this is the kind of mission, we will be doing from now on. This is the role we will be performing. 2014, also was the year of the return of NATO's old nemesis, Russia. The occupation of Crimea and the crisis in Ukraine. But the problem for NATO, it was kind of back to basics. But on the other hand, the old nemesis renewed itself. Especially it mastered the art of hybrid or fourth generation warfare, which it practiced very successfully in Ukraine, in the battlefields of Ukraine. So, after 2 decades of experiences, in missions other than collective security, NATO has learned some lessons and tried to implement those lessons and brought them into the fold of its institutional mindset. One of them was, as part of efforts to tackle hybrid threats, was to bring social media, into or include social media among the domains in which NATO operates. Well, this brings me to the recent crisis in Norway. The crisis was discovered during the social media part of the exercise called NATO's Trident Javelin planning exercise. Well, I'm not so sure about it, but I think this was a precursor or a preparation to NATO's very important and large-scale exercise, which is called Trident Juncture. Norway volunteered to host Trident Juncture 3 years ago, and in 2018, Norway will be indeed in charge of conducting that exercise. The whole episode involving Turkey and its important figures, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Republic, and the current President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in a way undermined NATO's ability to prepare itself properly for a major exercise, which is held in every 3 years. And also it undermined NATO's cohesion and coherence to some extent. Whether it will go on as planned or not remains to be seen. Also, NATO's dilemma here is, as an organization of 29 members, its decision-making structures are cumbersome. And when operating in a cyber domain, you are literally helpless to tackle nimble and unified actors, state or non-state actors. Therefore, this partly explains how NATO could not prevented this from happening. My final point is whether what happened last week was an accident, a hiccup, as a result of lack of perfectioning, or as a result of non-matured procedures to conduct social media operations as a part of NATO's new approach to security, especially bringing more civilian element, civil-military cooperation, enhanced civil-military cooperation procedures or not. If it was an accident, and if it is considered as such, as a hiccup, we may go on business as usual. But my understanding is that it is the tipping point. I think it is a manifestation, it's a consequence of accumulations of years of accumulations of problems between Turkey and NATO, and in particular, and between Turkey and its Western allies. I have two arguments to support this view. One is the political aspect, the other one is institutional aspect. The simple, beginning with the institutional aspect, two major NATO members, United States and Turkey, their militaries are no longer socialized, mostly in NATO. United States military's focus has shifted away from European theater of operations to the Middle East, and that brought the central command to the fore, not the Europol, which used to be the case. In the Turkish case, Turkish military's main security challenge has been in the southeast of country. Therefore, the established patterns of promotion, established patterns of assignments have broken, and in a sense, this resulted in de-emphasizing the role of NATO or NATO-related assignments in Turkey, in Turkish military. Therefore, the US and Turkish military's main occupations are not directly related to NATO. So this has created a conflict or a divergence of focus between the two militaries. I can elaborate on this during the Q&A. As for the political part, the problem is more serious. Well, what we witnessed last week was probably the consequence of a lack of political will on both the West and in Turkey to maintain, to keep the relations intact from the recent developments. I mean, this may be seen as a part of process of Turkey's alienation from the West in general and its pursuit of an independent and assertive foreign and security policy, and in an attempt to gain regional prominence in the surrounding regions. And mostly, I mean, this political will, lack of this political will is evident in the case of Turkey. You know, the public opinion has been very much influenced negatively by the recent events. Despite official statements, it seems that there is political capital to seize or to take advantage from this incident in promoting anti-Western, anti-US and anti-NATO agenda in this country. I'm going to stop here, Mr. Chairman, and maybe I'll talk later.
Great, thank you for keeping the time also. Our third speaker is Ambassador Ünal Çevikoz, who is also now the President of Ankara Policy Center.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me first of all express my sincere appreciation to the organizers of this meeting, the CIS, the International Relations Council, and you, Rector, personally for chairing our panel, and of course to Kadir University. Probably among you in the panel, I'm the oldest, and I have probably a very peculiar experience because I have started my career in the Soviet Union in 1982-81, and I served as a young Turkish secretary of the Turkish Embassy in Moscow from 1981 to 1982. And then my career took me to Brussels in 1989, and I stayed in Brussels as a member of the NATO International Secretariat for 8 years. 5 years as a member of the Economics Directorate, as an administrator, and 3 years from 1994 onwards to 1997, I was the member of the Partnership and Cooperation section of the Political Department. And during that period, in the 3 years, I have been involved in the drafting of the NATO-Russia Founding Act. So, starting my career in the former Soviet Union, continuing my career as a member of the NATO International Staff, and drafting the NATO-Russia Founding Act, I'm amazed to see that today Turkey is discussing whether it should leave NATO or not. You have, Professor, you have rightfully mentioned that it is probably the exact timing when we are organizing this panel and we are having this discussion. However, we did not plan it. And I am so grateful to Ambassador İldem that he has clarified what has happened in Norway. And I'm also grateful to Serhat that he has also mentioned particularly the next year's event that will be hosted by Norway, the Trident Javelin exercise. It is also important that in September this year, Russia has also organized a very important big exercise, Zapad 17. And this exercise has drawn the attention of NATO countries, and unfortunately, many NATO countries applied for being an observer in that exercise, but correct me if I'm wrong, Ambassador İldem, none of them have been granted the right to have observation in the Zapad 17 military exercise of Russia. This is quite strange because normally there is an understanding between the two sides that when there is an exercise very close to your borders, then you have the right to ask for observation and you are generally granted to have this observation possibility. So when you think in these terms, it's very easy to develop a conspiracy theory that what has happened in Norway is probably going to endanger the implementation of next year's Trident Javelin exercise, as has been mentioned by Serhat. However, what I am going to emphasize here is not about NATO or not about military exercises. What I'm going to focus on is about the reaction that many circles, particularly in the universities, not in that university certainly, but in several other universities and in other places in Turkey and in the media, that resulted in a campaign asking for withdrawal of Turkey from NATO. When I look at these discussions, I simply ask the question to all those people to go back into history and look at the time when Turkey applied for becoming a member of NATO. And if I start from that, then I have two very important observations to make. Turkey has applied to become a member of NATO just after the Second World War, when the Soviet Union had some intentions on the Bosphorus and also on the eastern part of Turkey, and that, of course, has created some kind of pressure on Turkey, and it needed to enhance its national defense and security. The second observation that I want to make is, again, immediately after the Second World War, Turkey gradually started to open up to the international world, to the international arena, to international politics, and to become member of important European, Euro-Atlantic, and international organizations. This is the time when Turkey makes a choice about its future to become a part of Western civilizations, to become a part of democratic societies where there are a number of nations and countries who define a set of values which are actually universal set of values based on fundamental human rights and democratic rights. Now, if I look at these two observations, and if I look at the discussion about Turkey withdrawing from NATO today, then I simply say that, okay, are we going to leave all these democratic principles that we have been attached to for the last 60 years, and in fact, which are the causes of Turkey's becoming a member? If the choice 60 years ago was wrong, then, and if you say that it was wrong, then the discussion might have some kind of legitimacy. But I believe that in the last 60 years, the progress of democracy in Turkey has shown that Turkey had done the right choice 60 years ago by making itself a member of NATO. But if this discussion is not being introduced into the society, then probably there is a preparation underneath that Turkey should also question all those values and principles that it has been sticking to for the last 60 years. Is this something that we really want to debate? That is my question. The other observation that I want to make is, of course, for the last 15 years, unfortunately, Turkey is having a very serious depreciation in its image as far as its relations and its place and its perception in the international arena and in the international politics is concerned. This depreciation, unfortunately, is causing loss of confidence, trust to Turkey from its allies, but it's also resulting with some kind of a judgment about Turkey's foreign policy conduct, which suggests that Turkey is becoming less predictable, less reliable, and less predictable, reliable, and operational, which will be of course in compliance with the requirements and the obligations that it has in the alliance that it is a part of. Now, if this kind of an image is the prevailing image and perception about Turkey, this is also another question that we have to seriously look into and discuss. I think what has happened in Oslo is a very individual event, and it doesn't have anything to do with the organization at all. And it should not create a discussion about Turkey's place and position in NATO. But overall, the main discussion should focus on particularly how Turkey's image and Turkey's perception that has become so bad in the eyes of the international community can be corrected. If we can give answers to these questions, I think the discussion about Turkey's future relations with the organizations that it's a part of and is a member of would fall from the agenda. Finally, I think it is also important to underline here that if Turkey leaves NATO, Turkey does not have any other alternative as far as its national defense and its security is concerned. Why do I say that? Because the alternative in the East cannot be any organization which is being frequently mentioned, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, or any kind of an arrangement, either bilateral or a multilateral format, together with Russia or Iran. First of all, Russia and Iran do not have such a multilateral format where they are cooperating. It's just a conjecture which is bringing these two countries together, particularly to deal with the problem in Syria. And the other alternative is, of course, the Russian-dominated and Russian-inspired CSTO, which involves the former Soviet republics as a defense organization. Now, if you look at all these alternatives, if they can be considered as alternatives, then all the values that I have mentioned and all the issues which have inspired Turkey to become a member of NATO are not there. All the countries that we have mentioned to the east of our country are not in compliance with the universal values, with the democratic rights and freedoms, and the concept which Turkey has stuck to for the last 60 years. And that's the reason why I cannot see any alternative for Turkey if Turkey leaves NATO and if it tries to look for any substitute in its east. I think that is where I should stop, and probably I have been cooperative enough so that the discussion can be.
Good to see you. Our last speaker in this session is Bruno Lété. He's a senior fellow from German Marshall Fund of the United States from Brussels.
Well, thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to be in beautiful Istanbul. Thank you to Kadir for inviting me. All the speakers have done a great job at raising the points that I wanted to raise, but maybe as the only non-Turk on the panel, I can perhaps try to give an outsider's perspective a little bit on the subject matter. So I perhaps want to make four short points. First one is that when we talk about Turkey-NATO relations or even Turkey-European relations as such, I think it's really important to first start with the fact to recognize how closely interwoven the interests are. It is a simple but very important fact to underline. And it goes well beyond just the security dimension. Think, for instance, about the fact that Europe is Turkey's leading economic partner, the millions of Turks that are living in Europe. So I think you basically have two parties here that have a massive amount of shared interests. And certainly when you go to capital cities on both sides of the Atlantic, Turkey is being taken very seriously. And there's definitely an understanding in cities like Brussels or Washington or other allied capitals, an understanding that Turkey is central to the problems that generate or that contribute to Europe's own insecurity, that Turkey takes a central place in addressing these issues. So I think it's important to really underline that first. Now, in that respect, perhaps in the past, the transatlantic allies were looking at Turkey more like a physical and cultural bridge to address many of the problems that we just discussed, like foreign fighters or terrorism or human security and criminal trafficking. But perhaps today, this consideration of physical and cultural bridge, I think there's also more and more concern on both sides of the Atlantic about the continued viability of Turkey to also be a barrier to these forces threatening the security of Europe. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit more about rhetoric, because the current debate makes a truly comprehensive strategic approach between Turkey and the allies more and more elusive, I would say, and the politics are basically complicating that relationship. And I do refer to what I would call this war of words. The arguments are quite known. It's hardly constructive, and it also, I would say, masks the reality that many different things are happening and between NATO and Turkey in terms of cooperation. It seems to me that sometimes we're so busy talking about what NATO and Turkey are not doing that we forget to talk about the things that NATO and Turkey are doing. And especially, being based in Brussels, we talk about these many different initiatives and projects that NATO and Turkey are working on. For instance, one concrete topic that we were addressing at the event last time was Turkey's contribution to the trust funds and NATO trust funds in Ukraine, for instance. It's very concrete cooperation projects. But again, so I would say that on the operational level, even though there's perhaps disagreement on the policy side, you see that on the operational level there's often business as usual. But of course, this issue of rhetoric threatens also to imperil this operational cooperation, and that's something we need to look at, I think. Now, third point. Well, would Turkey then have alternatives to NATO, given all the concerns addressed? If I just look at Turkish foreign policy, if I may, I would say that the desire to develop closer ties with the Muslim world has proven perhaps more of a dead end and has not delivered some of the results that were thought. Turkey being a NATO member certainly contributes partially to that. Ankara's periodic flirtations with Eurasia, in my opinion, perhaps interesting from an economic perspective, but does it really offer a serious strategic opening? Could be argued about. And then, of course, this one thing that keeps us, at least in Brussels, it's often the topic, it's the Russian-Turkey relationship. Here again, many efforts have happened to restore relations since the downing of the Russian jet fighter. But from my perspective, when it comes to Moscow is interested in things like tourism and energy projects, and perhaps Syria. I'm not so sure that it covers all the different interests that Turkey would be interested in. So again, when I really look at the spectrum of alternatives, I just don't see a viable substitute for NATO as an attractive security partner for Turkey. That brings me to my fourth point. How do we move forward, especially as there's going to be again a summit in Brussels in 2018. And as it was already said, NATO is constantly transforming and is currently really looking also to do more in the south. NATO is looking south. Now, if I would be Turkish, I would see this as an opportunity and to actively shape those policies south. Here I think there's a really important element for Turkey to work on risk reduction, tactical cooperation that addresses risk reduction in Turkey's neighborhoods. So this is a little bit my points I wanted to make, and happy to elaborate further.
Thank you, Bruno. I'd like to tell all the panelists that they kept the time allocated, so I'd like the audience also to be conscious of the time. I'm opening the floor now to get questions, but mind you, please have only questions. We have half an hour to discuss, so don't go in presentations. Cut it. Okay, please tell your name, who you are, where you come from, and what's your question. Do we have microphones? Yeah?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Ata Atalay from National Security Council, General Secretariat. I would like to address a question to Ambassador İldem related to the process, the overall process on Turkey-NATO relations. It was mentioned that since 1952, yes, Turkey is an active participant in NATO. In late 1960s, there was a handful of leftist nowadays we see that it's much beyond that. There's a considerable portion of the society questioning NATO. Is there an assessment in NATO related to this picture? Also underlining the cost and benefits of both parties. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, please.
My name is Aydın. I am a PhD student at Kadir University. I would like to mention two events. 2 months ago, Emmanuel Macron called for EU army and shared defense budget. And last week, 20 European countries held a meeting in Lausanne that event prompted Germany and France also. The headline of the summit was Permanent Structured Cooperation to fund and develop joint military hardware in a show of unity following after Brexit. Is this indicate that the NATO really transforming, or they are looking sort of different alliance?
Okay. Would you pass here in the microphone?
I'm Mehmet Yavuz. I'm a senior undergraduate student in Kadir University Political Science Department. I agree with all the panelists that Turkey has no alternative to NATO in terms of security, identity, and many other things. But I also think that also Turkey's Western allies are trying to base their relationship with Turkey on a transactional base, rather than being, I don't know, rather than considering Turkish public opinion that Turkey is a part of Western alliance. So don't you think that also Westerns have something to blame?
This is the question to everybody.
Let me ask you, Mr. Bruno. Don't take it personally.
That's okay. Thank you. Have here. Great. We are having quick questions. Thank you.
This is Elisa Gezer, Sputnik correspondent. Do you believe NATO is still an unsubstituted and effective organization for Turkey regarding to these two issues? One is the political developments in Syria, and the second is as for counter purchase of Turkey. I want to ask this question to Bruno Lété, because he said that Moscow is interested in energy tourism, etc., but seems like I think Moscow is interested in more
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have another one here. Good questions.
Hello, my name is Janat Shiba from Algeria, student at my university and researcher at Guvenc Center here in Istanbul. I have a book under printing now about Turkish foreign policy, about the effects of international system structure on the Turkish foreign policy. At my last chapter, I talked about the current transformation on the international system structure and what's called by Joseph Nye and Dick Ferguson and others, the transition of power from east into the west, and how to affect the Turkish foreign policy. How this transformation pushed Turkey toward east, toward the rising powers. And I would like to hear your opinion about this subject. Thank you.
All the panelists, I presume. Okay. Anybody else? Shall we? Yeah, let's go back to the panel now. But let me put one more question. The panel has too much focused on Turkey first, obviously. But I think we are neglecting to talk challenges ahead. What NATO is interested in near years, and what about Turkey's interest in near future, and what are the problems that we are missing here, not talking. We are focusing too much on the crisis management at the moment. But what are the issues that we should be focusing on, the security-wise? Okay, let's start with Serhat.
I would like to begin by trying to answer the question before yours, Mr. President. Well, the world's center of gravity is shifting eastward. I mean, that's we all tend to agree. Therefore, it is natural that Turkey. Not one.
Something wrong with you.
Maybe I should
I think something wrong with you. Whenever you start talking,
but the mic was not on.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, maybe my cell phone was on. I don't know.
Okay, go.
Maybe.
Tamam mı? Çözdük mü? Evet. Altta belki de. Tamam mı? Çözdük. Ama bu da çalışmıyor. Diyor gibi. Çalışıyor gibi yapıyor ama çalışmıyor. Onu ver. Yok hiçbir şey. Sen mikrofonsuz konuş.
Thank you. Short answer, yes. The world's, the center of gravity of world politics have shifted eastward. Therefore, the West is no longer the center of the world. It is the main or the principal agenda setter. And some even argue that this is the end of liberal international order, whose leadership US took over from Britain at the end of the Second World War. Therefore, it is natural that Turkey is interested in diversifying its relations, web of relations or network of relations, with by bringing more and more Euro-Asian or Asian countries into the picture, into its foreign policy. So that's natural. That's in response to that overall global development. As for other issues, risks, and security challenges, I think the most important one is Donald Trump himself. For the future of NATO, I think, the highest risk, he poses the highest risk to the coherence of and the survival of the alliance, if I may. Well, the US should make up its mind about the future of liberal international order, of which NATO is a part. Therefore, we are dealing with a fundamental question, whether the liberal international system may survive as we know it or not, or whether the America First policy of Donald Trump will result in a global leadership vacuum, which may suck, regional and other global actors into again a geopolitical rivalry. So that's my short answer.
Okay, thank you. I will go to Ambassador Çevikoz. Do you have something to say?
Don't think that some question.
Not directly.
No.
You want to react?
Okay. I'm not a reaction.
Bruno.
All right, well, I have two questions. Okay, so on the transactional thing, well, look, when you're married, and let's suppose for a second that NATO and Turkey are married, when you have a quarrel, it's usually both sides that have a stake in that dispute, right? So let's just start from that. I think transactional maybe, and it actually is something that we raised this morning in brainstorming. Basically, you need to see if it's basically an issue. So
I think
it's basically an issue where you need to evaluate. You need to recognize that you disagree perhaps on policy, but despite that, can you cooperate on practical things? As a matter of fact, when you look at US-Turkey relations for decades, this was very much the case like that. US and Turkey were claiming for many, many years that they were strategic partners, but in reality, what did it entail? It was just a series of operational initiatives. While recognizing that on policy they would disagree, but they would keep the issues a little bit aside, just for the sake of practical movement forward. So, the question is, if that is the transactional relationship that Turkey and NATO desire, I think in the long term this is not viable, because then it also brings issues of trust. I think if you don't trust on one hand, you can also not trust in other areas. That for me is a danger of the transactional relationship. I would not advise it. On Russia. Well, look, thank you for asking this. I like to talk about Russia, as a matter of fact. Look, I think, what is the difference between Ankara's relation with Moscow and Ankara's relation with Brussels? It's Article 5. And that makes a huge difference. Also, if you look at other things, look for instance at Syria. Perhaps Turkey and Russia have arrangements of convenience in Syria on short term, but let's be frank, in the long term, Turkish-Russian interests in Syria are not aligned. Or look, for instance, at the buildup of Russian military assets in the Black Sea, and some of the frozen conflicts that are not frozen at all due to Russian interventions in the Black Sea region. Can't say that this is in Turkey's interest either, I would say. So again, is there more that Moscow wants to do with Turkey? Probably yes. But will Moscow pursue those interests in a way that it also fits Turkey's interest? I'm not so sure. Look, Moscow doesn't do win-win situations. That's not how Moscow thinks. Moscow just thinks about Moscow. And that's it.
First of all, once again I have to repeat my earlier point that debates like this one is so important. You refer to the way NATO was perceived by a number of people usually affiliated with leftist thinking in the past, in the 1960s we referred to, and you also told that now the numbers are different and perhaps the political orientations of those who have a critical eye about NATO. So we need to diagnose the problem. When we look to certain surveys conducted in different parts of NATO, we see that there is lack of knowledge base regarding what NATO stands for, what its policies are, what kind of operations and missions NATO conducts, what kind of activities that it is engaged with partner nations to strengthen their defense capacities, for them to be resilient in addressing some of the emerging challenges of our time. And the common denominator in all these surveys suggests that this lack of knowledge base is more in the young generation. I'm happy to see many young friends in this room, and I'm sure that most of them are students of international relations, probably. So I assume that they have enough of knowledge. So I exclude them from this generalization of the common observation. But what we need to do is definitely to elevate a good understanding in different parts of the alliance, and it is something that we are trying to do. We are also obliged as democratic governments, because as Ambassador Çevikoz has rightfully referred to, the Washington Treaty states that NATO brings together countries with democracies, countries with attachment of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and rule of law. Therefore, it is also the responsibility of governments to enlighten publics about their security policies and orientations. And in that respect, NATO has also a duty to reach out to wider audiences to explain what is what. It is also something important, especially in our time when we are struggling with increasing disinformation and propaganda and fake news. So we need to be aware of this challenge and equip ourselves to be resilient. We are talking about hybrid warfare, we are talking about cyber attacks, hacking, and all requires us to strengthen our knowledge base. I don't think that we are having an informed discussion yet. To have an informed discussion, we first should be equipped by knowledge and for truth to prevail prominently in the information space. We sometimes get carried away in different societies, including my own country, Turkey, with fake news. And I don't know to what extent we have the media literacy that we talk about in dealing with certain challenges, and the way to trace the sources of information and to determine whether we are tackling fake news or deliberate disinformation and propaganda. Now, things related to Russia, I think Ambassador Çevikoz has already shed some light. What I could emphasize is that I served as Turkish ambassador to NATO from 2006 to 2009. I also was present in my earlier duties in Practica di Mare when NATO-Russia Council was founded. We have NATO-Russia Founding Act. But not only that, we have Helsinki Final Act, which should govern the conduct of relations in Europe. And Russia is a signatory to all these basic instruments. And there are a number of news reports that we are reading every day. I will not name names as to the sources of these stories, but definitely it portrays NATO to be in an expansion mode, provoking certain crisis, and also crisis with the Russian Federation. But NATO has shown its readiness to engage with Russia as a reliable partner. But what we have seen in 2014 with the illegitimate and illegal annexation of Crimea is clear. It is a clear violation of the rule-based international order. Therefore, it is not out of the blue that in 2016, during the Warsaw Summit meeting, NATO heads of state and government, and Turkey was included in the decisions, decided to have enhanced forward presence and tailored forward presence with the deployment of battle groups in Baltic countries and Poland. It is not by coincidence that a number of leaders, and Turkey was included, expressed concern in the militarization of the Black Sea. And the decision to have proper military presence of NATO was determined at that time. Therefore, I have to once again emphasize that the strengthening of deterrence and defense of NATO as part of NATO's Warsaw Summit meeting decisions should not be seen in isolation. It has also a very important component, which is meaningful dialogue with the Russian Federation. Ambassador Çevikoz referred to Zapad exercise. Well, Zapad exercise is one series of exercise that takes place every 3 years. And the Russian Federation shared some information regarding this Zapad exercise prior to the conduct of exercise during NATO-Russia Council meeting, and the figure that was shared at that time was 12,700 forces to be involved in this exercise. And according to Vienna document, which is part of the political commitments within OSCE, stipulates that the OSCE participating states has a mandatory obligation to open their exercises which exceeds the threshold of 13,000 to mandatory observations. So it was 300 short of the threshold, which did not give the possibility to have proper exercise observations by NATO allies. I know, I don't want to go into numbers because one may argue this way or other, but definitely it was far beyond the declared numbers. So sometimes, without knowing these facts and realities, we may be tempted to make judgments unfavorable of NATO. And let us also remember, this is to complement what Ambassador Çevikoz has said, during the downing of the jet fighter from Russia, it was Turkey knocking at the door of NATO to convene the meeting of the North Atlantic Council, and there was a strong statement that came out of that meeting expressing solidarity with Turkey, but at the same time also suggesting that the best way would be to engage with Russia in a dialogue. So what I'm trying to say is that the value added of NATO, and it was also mentioned by Mr. Bruno Lété that Article 5 is the cornerstone of the Washington Treaty, but equally important article, another article, is Article 4, which talks about consultations at NATO among allies. And Turkey has used this Article 4 on several occasions to share its very legitimate security concerns with its allies, and received support, understanding, and solidarity from all allies. Therefore, my wish and plea first to our rector that he continues with all the people who are so much engaged in generating a good debate on security issues. This is what we need on objective grounds and basis, and then to have an informed discussion whether we should stay with NATO or have alternative security arrangements. I once again thank you for this opportunity, because we need such discussions to take place, and I also offer our readiness and willingness as my division to be in close contact to bring some truth and objective elements, facts, for any discussion to take place in a pragmatic manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Serhat Guvenc actually mentioned Donald Trump as the biggest threat in the near future for NATO and for the alliance. But actually we owe to him, the wording of fake news. Now everybody is using the wording of fake news as if it existed for centuries. No, it's just started using it a couple of years now. Just a self-promotion, Kadir University's new media department prepared, in cooperation with Facebook, they prepared guidelines to recognize the fake news in social media. And it was hosted for about, I think, 41 million of Turkish Facebook users. So if you haven't received it, go and check your Facebook accounts and employ guidelines there. If nobody else has a burning desire to ask a big question, I think we have concluded this session. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their open remarks, candid remarks, and also I'd like to thank you for sticking with us in this quite humid and hot room to discuss the security issue.